Welcome to love's tender flame, tales of romance. I'm Mardell, reading Come Out of the Kitchen by Alice Duer Miller. Chapter 3. His household cares disposed of, Crane went off to the stables. It was a soft, hazy autumn morning, and though he walked along whistling, his heart was heavy. These changes in background always depressed him. His mother had been dead about 2 years, and at times like this he particularly missed her. She had always contrived to make domestic difficulties not only unimportant but amusing. She had been pretty and young, both in years and spirit, and had had the determining influence on her son since his childhood. His parents had married early and imprudently. The elder Crane, stung by some ill-considered words of his wife's family, had resolved from the first to make a successful career for himself. Shrewd, hard, and determined, he had not missed his mark. Burton's earliest recollections of him were fleeting glimpses of a white, tired, silent man, seldom, it seemed to him, at home, and by his gracious absences giving him, Burton, a sort of prior claim on all the time and all the attention of his mother. As he grew older, and his father's fortune actually materialized, he began to see that it had never given pleasure to his mother, that it had first taken her husband's time and strength away, and had then changed the very stuff out of which the man was made. He had grown to love not only the game, but the rewards of the game, and Burton knew now that very early his mother had begun deliberately to teach him the supreme importance of human relationships, that she had somehow inculcated in him a contempt not perhaps for money, but for those who valued money. Under her tuition, he had absorbed a point of view not very usual among either rich or poor, namely that money, like good health, was excellent to have, chiefly because when you had it, you did not have to think about it. Both her lessons were valuable to a young man left at 25 with a large fortune, but the second, the high delight in companionship, she had taught him through her own delightful personality, and her death left him desperately lonely. His loneliness made him, as one of his friends had said, extremely open to the dangers of matrimony, while on the other hand, he had been rendered highly fastidious by his years of happy intimacy with his mother. Her wit and good temper he might have found in another woman, even possibly her concentrated interest in himself, but her fortunate sense of proportion, her knowledge in everyday life as to what was trivial and what was essential, he found strangely lacking in all his other friends. He thought now how amusing she would have been about the manicured maidservants, and how, if he and she had been breakfasting together, they would have amused themselves by inventing fantastic explanations, instead of quarreling and sulking at each other as he and Tucker had done. Tucker had been his father's lawyer. It had been one of the many contradictions in Mrs. Crane's character that though she had always insisted that as a matter of loyalty to her husband, Tucker should be retained as family adviser, she had never been able to conceal from Burton, even when he was still a boy, that she considered the lawyer an intensely comic character. She used to contrive to throw a world of significance into her pronunciation of his name, Solon. Crane could still hear her saying it, as if she were indeed addressing the original lawgiver, and it was largely because this recollection was too vivid that he had himself taken to calling his counselor by his last name. He sighed as he thought of all this. But he was a young man, the day was fine, and his horses an absorbing interest, and so he spent a very happy morning, passing his hand along doubtful fetlocks and withers, and consulting with his head man on all the infinity of detail which constitutes the chief joy of so many sports. At lunch he appeared to be interested in nothing but the selection of the best mount for Miss Falconer, a state of mind which Tucker considered a great deal more suitable than his former frivolous interest in cats, and soon after lunch was over he went off for a ride, so as to get it in before he had to go and meet his new guest. A back piazza ran past the dining room windows. It was shady and contained a long wicker chair. The November afternoon was warm, and here Tucker decided to rest, possibly to sleep, in order to recuperate from a disturbing night and morning. He contrived to make himself very comfortable with a sofa pillow and extra overcoat. He slept indeed so long that when he woke the light was beginning to fade. He lay quiet a few moments, thinking that Mrs. Falconer would soon arrive, and revolving the best and most encouraging terms in which you could describe the situation to her, when he became aware of voices. His piazza was immediately above the kitchen door, and it was clear that someone had just entered the kitchen from outdoors, and he heard a voice, unmistakably Jane Ellen's, say, "Stranger, see how glad Willoughby is to see you again. Just think, he hasn't laid eyes on you for all of 3 days." Tucker could not catch the answer, which was made in a deep masculine voice, but it was easy to guess its import from the reply of Jane Ellen. "Oh, I'm glad to see you too." Another murmur. "How do you expect me to show it?" A murmur. "Don't be absurd, Ranny." And she added quite audibly, "If you really want proof, I'll give it to you. I was just thinking. I needed someone to help me freeze the ice cream. Give it a turn or two, will you, like a dear?" It was obvious that the visitor was of docile nature, for presently the faint, regular squeak of an ice cream freezer was heard. His heart was not wholly in his work, however, for soon he began to complain. Tucker gathered that the freezer was set outside the kitchen door, and that the visitor now had to raise his voice slightly in order to be heard in the kitchen, for both speakers were audible. "Yes," said the visitor, "that's the way you are. You expect everyone to work for you." "Don't you enjoy working for me, Randy? You've always said it was the one thing in the world gave you pleasure." "Huh," returned the other grimly. "I don't know that I'm so eager to freeze Crane's ice cream." "And Mr. Tucker's, don't forget him." "Who the deuce is Tucker?" The listener above sat up and leaned forward eagerly. "Tucker," said Jane Ellen, "is our guest at present. He's my favorite and Willoughby's. He has what you might call a virile, dominating personality. Please don't turn so fast, or you'll ruin the dessert." "How did you come in contact with Tucker, I should like to know? Does he come into the kitchen?" "Not yet." "How did you see him at all?" "Owing to his kicking Willoughby down the stairs." "And you mean to say you stood for that? Why, my dear girl, if anyone had told me that—" "Cruel, perhaps, Ranny, but the action of a strong man." "I think it's a great mistake," said the masculine voice in a tone of profound displeasure, "for a girl situated as you are to have anything to do with her employer and his guests. What do you know about these fellows? How old is this Tucker?" "Oh, about 40, I should think." The listener's eyes brightened by 10 years. "What does he look like?" "Oh, people are so difficult to describe, Ranny." "You can describe them all right when you try." "Well," Tucker's excitement became intense. Well, he looks like the husband on the stage with a dash of powder above the ears who wins the weak young wife back in the last act. With a long, deep breath, Tucker rose to his feet. He felt like a different man, a strong, dangerous fellow. "Dear girl," said the masculine voice below him, "you're not going to let this man make love to you?" "Oh, Ranny, he's never tried. He's much too dignified and reserved." "But if he did try, you would not let him." "You, if anyone, ought to know that it isn't always easy to prevent." "I don't know what you mean by that. You've always prevented me as often as you wanted to." "Often, but not as often as that. There, Ranny, do get on with the ice cream. That terrible old woman is coming to stay this evening with her daughter, and you may be sure she'll have us all turned out if anything isn't just right." "Crane is supposed to be engaged to the daughter," said the male voice. "Well, I don't envy him, his mother-in-law." "What do you think of Crane?" There was a pause. At first Tucker feared he might have missed the answer. But presently the question was repeated. "I asked you what you thought of Crane." "Oh, I've seen a good many young men of that type in my time," was the reply. "How strange women are," remarked the ice cream maker, who had once again settled down to work. "I should have thought Crane's just the man to attract women. Well built, good looking, a splendid horseman." "Would you say good looking?" asked the cook. Tucker had been putting exactly the same question to himself. But the speaker did not intend to answer it. He went on with his own train of thought. "And here you go into raptures over an old fella, old enough to be your father." "Should you say I went into raptures?" "You talk as if you were prepared to make an idol of the man." A pleasant laugh greeted this statement. Tucker grew grave. He did not feel that he thoroughly understood the cause of that laugh, but he took refuge in that comfortable and all-embracing theory that women were fond, unaccountable creatures, particularly when deeply moved. Another explanation was offered by the man below. "I believe you're just trying to tease me, Jane Ellen." "Trying, Ranny? You know very well you can always do whatever you like with me." The voice deepened with emotion. "Oh, dear me, no, I can't." "Why not?" "I can't keep you turning steadily at that crank. Here, let me show you how it ought to be done." Tucker knew that she had come out of the kitchen. By leaning over the railing, he could see the kitchen door. He leant over. The space before the entrance was paved in large square flagstones. Here an ice cream freezer was standing, and over it bent a young man of a somewhat solid build, but with the unmistakable manner and bearing of a gentleman. He straightened himself as Jane Ellen came out, and watched her closely as she grasped the handle of the freezer. But it seemed to the spectator above that he watched her with other emotions than the sincere wish to learn the correct manner of freezing. Tucker looked straight down upon her, upon the part in her light brown hair, upon her round little arms, for her sleeves were rolled up above the elbow, as she said didactically, "It ought to be a steady even." But she got no further, for her pupil, without a word, stooped forward and, gathering her into his arms, kissed her. Join me next time for another romantic chapter of Come Out of the Kitchen by Alice Duer Miller, here on Love's Tender Flame. Until then, love deeply and live beautifully.